and welcome to episode 90 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada.
I'm Heidi Parker. I'm a postdoc at the University of Texas at Austin.
I'm Tom Housley. I'm a postdoc at the University of Exeter in Penryn.
And this week, we're keeping the Alt-Actober thing going. That hashtag is not trending yet, unlike Tom's super successful hump off. But we're going to keep going. And this week, we're going to be talking to Drs. Nate Dappen and Neil Losin, who are nature and documentary filmmakers, as well as the owner and producers of Days Edge Productions. Welcome, Nate and Neil. Thanks a lot for joining us today. And can you tell everybody at home what exactly Days Edge is and what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So usually Days Edge involves me talking over Nate whenever he tries to say anything, just like happened right there. So actually, yeah, both Nate and I are trained as biologists, and I think, thought we were going to be academics, and then ended up becoming filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, primarily focusing on science and natural history, and whenever we can, focusing on evolution and animal behavior, the things that really got us into science in the first place. But our work ranges pretty widely to conservation and adventure and all sorts of things now.
So I'm glad you talked about what you guys do. There is a huge need for this. The science program that's out there, especially in the U.S., is pretty poor. So did this sort of come out of the need for it, or is this some other skill set you guys had, or how did this come about?
Well, when Neil and I were in grad school, we were both already serious photographers, and so certainly we were really passionate and interested in creating visual media in the first place. We're like, this is something we really love to do in the first place. But, of course, science communication is something that is really needed right now in the United States. There's kind of a war on science. If you look at one of the National Geographic covers, I think from March this year, it was the war on science. And so there's a lot of science denialism going on, and that certainly was something that motivated us as well. So we figured, there's a lot of PhDs out there working on awesome science, and we thought that we could have a bigger impact and maybe have more fun based on the things that we find interesting, going out there and creating media about people's research.
So what really drives what you guys decide to focus on? Is it what you're interested in, or is it people coming to you with ideas, or companies like giving you the funds to go and do something in particular?
Yeah, I mean, practically speaking, it has to depend in some part on where we can get the money that pays the bills. Historically, that's been a real mixture of different sources. So one of our couple of our first big projects, we did a coffee table book about actually the lizards that Nate studied for his PhD. It was a book called The Symbol, and we funded that largely through a crowdfunding campaign through Kickstarter, and that was like right after we finished our PhDs. So we did crowdfunding because we didn't really have the credibility to convince people to fund us in other ways. And then soon after that, one of our next big projects was a film called Snows of the Nile, which we shot. It's a film about climate change in tropical Africa. And we actually got Dos Equis, the beer company, to fund us on that. We got a $25,000 grant through them. But since then, now that we've actually made a lot more films, we're getting commissions from big NGOs like World Wildlife Fund to produce advocacy films for them, usually short films for the web. And we've also been written into the grants of a lot of scientists who want to produce media, don't necessarily have the expertise in-house. So they contract out to a group like ours to produce something that they can use for broader impact, say, if it's an NSF grant, which is something that everybody needs to have and nobody seems to know how to do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our work lately has come from those broader impact sections. And I'm sure the three of you have probably written your broader impact sections, and it's tough if you don't have media skills to say that you're actually going to do something legitimate with those broader impacts. And because reviewers are supposed to consider the intellectual merit and the broader impacts equally, if you commit to putting a little bit of money into media, I think that it actually increases the probability of your grant getting funded. So we've had a lot of luck with that.
I think it's really good, and I think you guys have got an interesting background, both being evolutionary biologists that are trained in the ways of the grant, to come back up and to take advantage in the not cynical way of of a lot of people's inability to communicate their science. So what did you guys think as you were going through your PhD and you saw photography and filmmaking as a potential outcome at the end of it? Were you building up these skills while you're doing your research, or were you trying to balance a lot of things at the same time, or did you mostly put one thing aside until time freed itself?
Yeah, I think both Neil and I had the intention of getting traditional postdocs and going on to getting tenure track research positions at a university. So we weren't, at least for the first 3/5 of our graduate school careers, thinking about this seriously. But we were doing photography seriously in our free time. It was a serious hobby of ours. And then once we kind of decided that filmmaking was something that we were interested in, we basically focused all of our free time into doing that. And at first it was kind of a competition thing. Neil would make something and I'd see what he did and I'd hate that it was better than anything I'd done. So then I'd make something that was pretty good and he'd get jealous about that. So at first it was like that, and then at a certain stage we sort of kind of decided, hey, maybe we should just try to go for it and do this professionally. And at that stage we really started thinking seriously about trying to build up the skills that we needed. And it was one of those things where it's just you fake it until you make it. We were pretending like we knew what we were doing to clients, and they believed us. And because we were working really hard, and I think that we had the skills that just weren't refined, we were able to produce good products. And I think that's what it's all about. And then once you've done it a few times, then it gets easier and easier to convince people that you know what you're doing.
Do you think it was a lot easier for you to take this route because there were two of you, and you both have longer, shaggy hair and beards, and could band together with your love of lizards?
Yeah, that's actually something we talk about a lot. One of the things we do is teach science video production workshops for scientists. That's something we can talk about more if you're interested. But when we're teaching these workshops, one of the things I say the most often is like, man, it would have been hard logistically, but also really tough, I think, psychologically to just sort of jump into the deep end of running a freelance media production company if I didn't have somebody to do that with, and somebody who I knew was taking just as big of a risk as I was stepping off the academic track and trying this different thing. I will say also that we had started calling ourselves Days Edge Productions, I think, in about 2010. So we hadn't established like an LLC or anything, but we had started to brand the products that we were putting out there with this name long before we actually tried to make money off of it. It was like 2 years later before we finally got our first paid gig, which was right around the time we finished grad school.
Well, that works out well then.
Yeah.
So you guys brought up support and the mutual support that you provided one another after you went through the evolution of competition and fitness and all that fun stuff, which appropriate enough. So what was the support like from your academic institution and from your committees and supervisors? You don't need to get like super into it, because I know those people's names are on the internet and it never looks good to shag on your advisory committee. But it's sometimes hard, perhaps, at least in my experience, for people that are taking alternate routes through their PhDs or their grad work to find the support they need in their institution.
Yeah. Well, I think we had two probably fairly different experiences. For me, my advisor, Greg Rether, is a pretty serious nature photographer in his free time, and so I think he certainly appreciated what I was already doing as a photographer. Even before I considered this as a career path, I was already taking pictures and selling wildlife pictures to magazines and stuff like that whenever I could. I think at first he might have been a little disappointed that I wasn't staying on the academic track, but I do think that he saw the value in what I was doing, and I think by the time I finished grad school, he had sort of come around to the idea that this was a good path for me that used all the different skills that I had, not just the skills in the lab and field doing science, but also the artistic side.
Yeah, my experience was a little different. I had an advisor who, even though now he remembers being very supportive, he was not very supportive of the idea. But I sort of, in retrospect, don't really blame him. A lot of students who are trying to decide what they want to do with their careers come to Neil and I, and they ask us, do you think I need to get a PhD in order to make science films? And I really don't. I think that if your goal is to go into science media, you should study science media, because there's a lot to be learned there that Neil and I are lacking and are sort of trying to catch up on a lot. I think if you're in graduate school and it's something that you're interested in, then I think that's something that you should pursue. But certainly for people who are interested, getting a PhD is really about refining your skills as a scientist. And I don't think that advisors should be, at least at the beginning of people's graduate career, they shouldn't be, promoting the idea, hey, like maybe you want to go into science media, so let's spend the next 5 years doing something completely unrelated to it, and getting you to be a super expert at this tiny, very, very specific thing. So my perspective is, does having a PhD help? Yeah, it helps a lot, and it certainly gets us credibility, street cred when we're at these festivals with other filmmakers. But certainly it's not the way I would have done it if I could have done it again, knowing that this was what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I think our path is a roundabout one to becoming documentary filmmakers. But the one thing that I'll add to that discussion is that I think you could want to become a PhD in biology and also want to become a filmmaker, and those be independent. I don't think the desire has to be, I need to get a PhD to be a filmmaker. You could just want to have both things and have those be part of your life experience, and that's also fine. I think grad school, as much as grad students complain about how swamped they are and stuff, unless your advisor is a totally hands-on kind of person who's micromanaging you, grad school is one of those times when you might have a ton of freedom in addition to being really busy, and it can be a time that's like a perfect time to cultivate an entirely new skill set, which is kind of what we did.
And I'll just add one more thing. I didn't mean to make it sound like academic advisors shouldn't promote the development of communication skills in their students. I just don't think that it's their responsibility to be producing and developing those skill sets. I think their responsibility is to teach their students how to do really good science. And if graduate students want to, in their free time, learn how to do communication, then like Neil said, you won't have as much free time after grad school as you did during grad school for most students.
So, bearing all that in mind, I was just wondering if there are any skills that you think that you've actually come out of grad school with. Obviously, apart from doing the photography on the side, then there must be some way that it prepared you for this, apart from just putting doctor at the beginning of your name for credibility reasons.
You can go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, so the only, I guess, apart from having a lot of still photography experience, which I think helps a lot with producing films, but not as much as probably most photographers who haven't made films think it might. The only real training I had producing video was taking like a 1 week long immersive science filmmaking course from a duo, Jeff Morales and Colin Bates, who Jeff Morales is a National Geographic television producer, and Colin Bates was a marine biologist, and they teamed up and started offering these workshops to scientists. Apart from that, it was like the ability to find kind of cool topics to make little short videos on, I think came naturally, especially when they were topics that were of interest to me. I was already in touch with the literature, and I knew there were lots of cool stories to tell. And then it was just a matter of getting a little bit of training and then doing a lot of trial and error to try and produce some things that I didn't hate before I started trying to sell that service to other people, because I would have felt bad selling a service that I didn't think was very good.
I mean, you have this series coming out just now on symbiosis. Do you think, that your ability to sort of think about these complex concepts, and then with the experience that you have and with the videos that you've made, that you can actually distill these into more simple communications for the general public?
I think having read a lot of peer-reviewed research certainly helps us get our heads wrapped around the science before we start thinking about how to simplify it and turn it into a story. There's no question that just our training on how to do research, on where to find the right articles, which labs are doing the kind of work, that certainly is a huge advantage. I do think that most science content that's not specifically made for scientists doesn't require a deep understanding of science. In the symbiosis, for example, it's relatively simple concepts. That I think that anybody who spent a lot of time trying to understand the science could understand it. But our background certainly helps us know where to look, and reading peer-reviewed articles is something I still find challenging. They're dense, and so having a little bit of experience doing that is great. The other thing that I think has absolutely helped us is learning how to write grants. Grant writing is something that getting 5 years to basically learn how to do that and practice it and do it has really helped us a lot. And Neil and I luckily have been successful with at least some of the grants we've written for getting money to make films. And so I think that is one thing that they don't train you how to do in a lot of other schools, that might lead you to become a filmmaker. So yeah.
So on some of your films, you guys are actually hosting it. So it's very different from just filmmaking, because now you're more of like a scientific personality on this. Is that something you want to pursue more and more, or is that just something you kind of did for a few of them?
I think that's been something that we've certainly had an interest in for a while, and we've done it in a number. The only really serious piece for a client that we've done that for is this film about the origin of corn for the Howard Hughes Medical Institute that I hosted. But we've appeared on a bunch of the sort of little independent films that we've made on our own, including while we were grad students, explaining our own research. We put ourselves on camera, of course, to kind of be that character in those films. And it's something that keeps coming up every time we go to a big film festival. There's always a few producers that have expressed interest in getting us in front of the camera. They kind of like the idea of the duo as presenters, and I think it would be a blast to do. We just haven't quite found the right vehicle for us on screen, on television yet. I think there's still a decent chance that somewhere down the line that'll happen. But actually, for the last 18 months, we've been so swamped with production work that we've kind of stopped actively pursuing that and focused on the production. But if the opportunity arises, somebody says, "Hey, we want to do a TV show with you," and it's a good idea, I mean, we'll definitely do it.
Yeah, no, I would love to do it. I just think anybody who likes teaching, they like performing, and it's a performance up there. Everyone's learning from something that you're saying, and I don't know, the few experiences that we've had in front of the camera have been a ton of fun. It's exciting, it's invigorating. People get to share the experiences that you're having. So I would love that. Just nothing too reality, because then we'll see our real personalities come out, and that's nasty,
A little bit of script goes a long way.
No one needs to see you guys getting ready in the morning and taking hours to get your hair done and the real fighting behind the scenes.
You think I woke up like this?
Yeah, those lizards are better. I hate those lizards. Those are my favorite species.
That's exactly what Neil and I argue about every day, our favorite species.
The G-chat is real. All right, that's awesome. So let's move on to some of your projects that you've got. So you guys have had a couple of really big projects come out in the last couple of years, between Snows of the Nile, which has seen from what I can tell, a lot of success within the filmmaking community. And then you just had your first hour-long feature published on, or broadcast, I guess is the right term in this sense, on cable television this year, which was Islands of Creation. So these are both major productions. Snows of the Nile, I absolutely loved. I thought that you guys did a great job, and it was a beautiful, beautiful film to watch. I haven't had the chance to see Islands of Creation yet, but I'm really looking forward to catching
Islands
it.
of Creation, I thought it was going to be about creationism, but so I was a little disappointed.
It's a little bit of a bait and switch there.
Can you imagine? That's a pretty tricky way to get it in.
So can you guys share a little bit about your experiences making these two films, which I assume are probably some of your more ambitious pieces to date?
Yeah, I'll take Snows of the Nile, and Neil, you can talk about Islands of Creation. So, Snows of the Nile was one of the more fun projects that we've worked on. It was an idea. Neil and I had won this small film festival run through the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and the prize was a commission to work on a bigger project. So we pitched this idea. Neil came up with the idea of going to tropical glaciers and recapturing historical photos of those glaciers to show what's happened since those images were originally created. And so we pitched this idea about going to Uganda, which have these mountains called the Ruwenzori Mountains, which are taller than the Rockies or the Alps. They divide Congo and Uganda. They're about 17,000 feet, and they've got glaciers on them. Probably going to be the last mountains in Africa with glaciers on them. And in 1906, this group of Italian explorers went and climbed them for the first time, and they brought along a famous photographer named Vittorio Sella. And so we wanted to retrace the steps of that expedition, recapture his photos of these glaciers to show the world what a century of climate change had done to this place. And it was a really great idea, and we pitched it to WWF, and they weren't interested in it. So we kind of just put it in our back pocket and decided, okay, well, we'll wait. And then Neil heard about this competition, the most interesting. I think it was called the most interesting competition or something like that.
The state. Well, it was the
State Thirsty Grant.
State Thirsty Grant.
Yeah, the State Thirsty Grant, which was part of their most interesting campaign. And so you had to make like a 3-minute pitch video about what you were going to do, and then it went to a popular vote. And so I just happened to be in Denver at the time, which is where Neil lived, and so he said, hey, let's go make a video. So my girlfriend at the time and came up and helped us make this little film, and Neil's wife came up and helped us make this little pitch video. We sent it in, and we won. And like a month later, we were meeting with the most interesting man in the world, and we didn't have a ton of experience yet filming. And like a month after that, we were in Uganda working on this film and climbing these cool mountains. So it was pretty fast and crazy, and we didn't have a budget. We had the money to cover the trip, but we were paying for the editing of it and the time on our own time. But it was totally worth putting that time into. We finished it. We started submitting the film to festivals. It started making it into some of the bigger festivals. Even won a few of them. And it was sort of the first time that anybody took us seriously. So it was really a springboard to launch our career. And I thought, the film got picked up by a lot of places. I think BuzzFeed put it on their, or Upworthy put it on their page, and I think it's probably been seen, close to, I don't know, like 500,000 times, 1 million times, or something like that across the world.
Like the same numbers our podcast.
Right.
Basically.
Right. So it was just really cool and a really big learning experience for us. So I was really pleased. I was, when you finish these films, you look back and you think, oh man, I wish we could have done this better and done that better. And I feel that way about this film. But when I go back and I consider that it was our first real film, our first major film, I'm pretty proud of it. And I think it's still being viewed. People are still buying it on Vimeo on demand. And you can watch it for free on YouTube as well. So yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. And seeing the Ruwenzori Mountains, because I've come across specimens and had to deal with stuff from the Ruwenzori Mountains, and it's this weird wingless flies that just crawl apparently through the dirt. So it was really cool for me to see you guys walking through where this crazy group of flies that nobody really cares about is taking hold and may be in trouble if, the globe continues to heat up. So
yeah, I wish we had known. We would have looked for the flies.
Yeah, they may not even be there anymore. I have no idea. They're just old records of wingless little flies hanging around in the dirt. So
Cool.
yeah. So that's Notice Now. That's a pretty damn good debut. And then you guys followed it up with Islands of Creation, which Neil, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the backstory of this one, we applied for a National Science Foundation grant with a researcher named Al Uwe at the University of Miami, and we applied through this really great program called Communicating Research with Public Audiences, CRPA. And this was a grant supplement program where any researcher with a grant in any directorate in the NSF could apply for a supplement up to $150,000 to do a major outreach project associated with their research. And NSF has since discontinued this program under congressional pressure, which is really sad. But we got in the last cycle in which these CRPA supplements got funded, and they funded our grant as one of the ones they chose to support. So. And our goal from the beginning was to produce a broadcast hour documentary that would hopefully end up, on National Geographic or Discovery or PBS or something like that. And so we spent a total of 5 weeks in the Solomon Islands with Al Uwe, following him around as he studied these monarch flycatchers that he's studying to understand speciation. They're a classic speciation system. These are one of the groups of birds that Ernst Mayr was really interested in back in the 1930s and 40s when he was working at the American Museum. They really informed some of his hypotheses about how speciation works. But of course, he didn't have any of the cool molecular tools that we have now. And so Al was one of the first researchers to sort of make it into the Solomon Islands once they politically stabilized in the early 2000s. And he's been studying these birds and revisiting some of these classic speciation questions that Ernst Mayr began ever since then, and discovering some really interesting things. And so it's kind of a science adventure story with really one character at its core. It follows Al Uwe. It's a very personal quest for him. He's become really heavily invested in the local communities there, the indigenous people, as well as the birds that he studies. So we shot that all in the first half of 2013. Again, I think I mentioned that we spent probably about 5 weeks in the field in total, just shooting, dawn to dusk, basically every day. And then we came back with all this footage and started to try and get people interested in this story we had to tell. And we basically had enough money through the NSF grant to fund all the field production, but not to fund the post-production and distribution. So we had to find a broadcaster to get on board if we wanted this story told. So in late 2013, we started pitching to different broadcasters at the Jackson Hole Wildlife Film Festival. At that point, the only thing we had edited was a little 2-minute teaser. But we got a couple of broadcasters interested, and eventually, after a prolonged period of negotiation where we basically had to convince them that we were to be trusted and taken seriously as relative newbie filmmakers, the Smithsonian Channel ended up acquiring the film as a co-production and working with us to finish it for broadcast and distribute it. And it just broadcast for the first time in June 2015, and it's broadcast several times since then, and I think will continue to be sporadically broadcast on the Smithsonian Channel until eventually we hope it'll be available for online streaming sometime early in 2016.
And it also just won the Best Broadcast Award at the American Conservation Film Festival, which Neil will be going to later this month.
Yeah, when I looked at your website and I clicked, I was like, click awards. Like, oh, do they have any awards? Yeah, all right. Quite a few, not messing around. So since it is like this alternative career October, I do want to ask, is there anything about science that you miss? Do you ever, when you can't sleep at night, do you think about what you would have done for your postdoc or how you would have been as a PI? Not that obviously you're doing something that's really fantastic and filling a niche, but just for the month of it.
I miss a lot of it for sure. I miss getting to ask questions, and I miss getting to do the field work. Not that our filmmaking doesn't get us out in the field a lot, but you know, it's hard. I always had trouble coming up with questions when I was at the department, but then when I go out in the field and spend a couple of months out in these Mediterranean islands studying these lizards, I would just get I was writing down question after question after question, and I probably could have spent a career working just on this one system. So there's a part of me that would have loved to do that, but at the same time, our career, we get so much science. I mean, and we get to learn deep whatever project we're working on. So when we were working on Islands of Creation, Neil and I were very, very in touch with the literature on speciation, and we got to meet tons of amazing researchers who were really inspiring and doing great work. So we get enough of a taste of it that I think I feel satisfied intellectually. But getting to play with lizards. Neil and I still go out and catch lizards in our free time whenever we're on a trip. So I miss certain parts of it, but I certainly wouldn't trade what we have right now to go into it. And that's not to say it wouldn't have been a great career. It would have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think in the broadest terms, I think we sort of sacrifice some depth in what we do, because we're never, I'm probably never going to work on anything in as much depth as I worked on anoles when I was doing my PhD. But we gain a ton of breadth. We get to visit researchers all over the world working on really cool things, both in the field and in the lab, in fields that are well outside our comfort zone in some cases, and that's pretty awesome. And to have those people, working hard to explain to us and to an audience what they do, and feel the passion that they have for what they do, even though it's something different from what we did, is really cool.
I'll also add, I've started recently to really feel like everyone's got their story about how they arrived at the careers that they have, and I think that my experience has been, and I know that I do this too, is we look back retrospectively and try to find the things in our lives that help us tell the narrative for how we arrived at the job that we have now. We say, oh, well, little Joey played with leaves, so it's no surprise that he's a biologist. But at the same time, Joey might have been playing with Legos as well, and he may have, if he became an engineer, that's the story they tell. And so I think what makes work really valuable is working really hard. I think working really hard at anything is what makes things really, really fun. And so if I think I'd be just as happy working as a scientist as I would as a filmmaker, as long as I had a project that I could work really hard on and get invested in. So investment is the key, I think.
I just wanted to briefly ask you guys about, Neil, you mentioned earlier that you're doing workshops as well. So is this on video making, and how has this affected how you make your own documentaries as well? I know from any teaching that I do that I feel more like I know it once I've taught it, which is possibly the wrong way around. But
yeah, so yeah, we have been teaching workshops. We've taught probably a dozen different workshops associated with different universities and research stations. Lately, we've been doing a lot through the Organization for Tropical Studies, OTS, down in Costa Rica. And basically, they tend to be workshops that are for graduate students and some early career professionals, postdocs or beginning professors sometimes sit in as well, where we're teaching them how to tell a science story, and how to use a camera, and how to edit video and edit sound and put together a multimedia story. And I think that does a couple of things for us. It does one great thing is it keeps us in touch with a lot of cool younger researchers who are already predisposed to be interested in outreach, and so we learn about cool science that's happening. We potentially make contacts with people who we might work with down the line on a film project. It's also great, to refamiliarize ourselves with some of the basics of, just kind of doing drills on storytelling. How do you turn a science paper, a scientific finding, into a story? That's something you can never have enough practice doing in our field. And what people learn, I think, from our workshops is they learn that telling a good science story through video can be really rewarding, and that it's definitely possible to do, even if you don't have a lot of money and a lot of fancy equipment. But I think people also learn that it's really hard, and sometimes if you want to be a working scientist, maybe it's best left to the professionals. I think that's a really valuable thing to learn as well, because we're showing them not only how to do it on their own if they want to, but we're making it known to them that there are people like us, and not just us. I mean, we're not just doing this to drive business to our own company, but there are a number of groups now like us who specialize in helping scientists tell their story. And I think just knowing that that exists is a really valuable thing for somebody who really wants to do quality outreach.
Yeah, I think it's great, and like you said, the division of labor from scientists to communication, while there may be some that can overlap and do some or all of the above, I think it's really valuable for you guys to have yourselves out there and helping the next generation of scientists get ready for the new NSF competitions that bring back those projects. We're pretty much out of time, but before we go, because this is Alt October and we're trying to get some advice and some tips and some exposure out there for people who may be on the fence about sticking around in academia or jumping ship and finding another fulfilling career. Do you guys have maybe a piece of advice each for taking that jump and jumping out of what we know as academics and into a new world?
Go ahead, Neil. I'll go second.
All right. Well, I might try two quick things. One is, we already talked about this, like, do it with a buddy if you can. Like, it makes such a difference in keeping your motivation up, in just making the logistics of doing something different even possible in some cases. And the other big piece of advice I would have is to, whatever it is that you think you might want to do other than academia, start doing it while you're a grad student, and start trying to do it well and at a professional level while you're a grad student, because it's an awful lot easier to prove to people that this is something you're capable of doing if you can show them examples of times that you've done it by the time you finish grad school, rather than finishing grad school having nothing to show for what you really want to do with your life and trying to convince people that you're good enough to do it.
Yeah, those are both really good pieces of advice. And another thing that I'll add to that is that there are, so two things. One, there are tons of competitions, small competitions that professional filmmakers don't enter usually because they're busy working for clients and stuff like that. A lot of our career at the start were launched from winning these small competitions. So creating small films in your free time when you're in grad school and submitting to these competitions is a great way to get practice, to get connected with other filmmakers, and to get some credibility once you move into the field. Also, I would say there's a handful of big film festivals that Neil and I were fundamental to Neil and I deciding to go into our career. One of the biggest ones is the Jackson Hole Wildlife Film Festival, which runs every 2 years. It just happened in Jackson Hole. It's an industry festival, so there aren't a lot of people from the public. It's mostly producers and executives from the big networks. But going to those places and getting connected, getting to know the young filmmakers who are also trying to get connected, creating a community. The first year that Neil and I went there, that's really when, for me at least, I met all these amazing filmmakers who inspired me, and I said, that's it, I'm going to become a filmmaker. But it was also when Neil and I got connected with a lot of young filmmakers who now are producing awesome stuff. They're producing broadcast stuff for a lot of different networks, and so you kind of grow together with your cohort who are at your level. So going to those film festivals, getting connected is super important, and obviously, as Neil said, practicing. You'll never have more free time than you have right now.
That's awesome. That's great advice. So if people at home are listening and they want to find more advice from you, or perhaps find what you guys are doing in which crazy part of the country you're in filming, where can they follow you online and follow along with both of your careers as you tackle this new and exciting world?
So you can find Days Edge Productions at www.daysedge.com, all one word. And you can search for Days Edge Productions on Facebook. We maintain a pretty active presence there. We're not the best tweeters, but we do have @DaysEdge is our Twitter feed, and then individually I'm @NeilLosin on Twitter and neillosin.com, and Nate, I forget what you are.
You'll find me at all those ones. The only difference, I also have my own personal website, which is natedappen.com. But otherwise, that's natedappen.com is really now just being populated with Days Edge projects. So Days Edge is where it's at.
Awesome. So for everybody listening at home, if you missed that, don't worry. You can go to breakingbio.com, and we'll have links to all of those sites and social media connections there on our website with our show notes, as well as links to some of the other stuff that we talked to, including some of the videos that Nate and Neil were talking about throughout the show. Also want to remind everybody they can find us on Twitter @BreakingBio, and as well as on Facebook by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast. If you want to leave us a comment or a note or a review or tell us what you hate about us, you can do that at iTunes and Stitcher. That helps us get discovered by more people until there are podcast festivals that we can show up to, like these guys. Until then, we need to thank the European Society for Evolutionary Biology for keeping the lights on, and we need to thank Nate and Neil for stopping by and telling us all about their career outside of academia. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. And everybody at home, we'll be keeping up with Alt October next week, and we have a new guest. Thanks.